May 1940, Germany sent fewer than 80 men in gliders to seize a fortress that was supposed to hold for days. They neutralized its gun emplacements within the first hour and forced the surrender of a garrison of nearly 800 men by the following afternoon. The world had never seen anything like it. 4 years later, roughly 20,000 American and British paratroopers jumped into Normandy before dawn. They seized bridges over the Orne River, destroyed a coastal battery that would have torn apart the landing beaches, and held critical ground on both flanks of the largest amphibious invasion in history, using doctrine built directly on what the Fallschirmjäger had proved. The force that had proved it was in Italy, holding a mountain, on foot, as infantry. In the summer of 1941, Waffen-SS formations drove hundreds of miles into the Soviet Union in the opening weeks of Operation Barbarossa, outpacing every timetable their own commanders had set. This is a video about two of the most capable military formations Germany produced and what Germany did to both of them. The Fallschirmjäger built their reputation in Norway, at Eben-Emael, at Corinth, and Crete. The key word in every one of their successes was before. Before the defenders could respond, before the bridges could be demolished, before the conventional ground force could arrive. Vertical envelopment gave Germany the ability to seize objectives faster than geography allowed any other force to reach them. Across 4 countries in 18 months, that logic held consistently. The Waffen-SS built theirs differently, through a longer and bloodier sequence of armoured engagements on the Eastern Front. At Kursk in July 1943, the SS Panzer Corps drove deeper into Soviet lines than any German formation on the southern flank, even as the broader operation collapsed around them. For the paratroopers, everything changed on a Greek island in the spring of 1941. Crete was the last major airborne operation the Fallschirmjäger ever conducted. In 10 days of fighting, roughly 6,000 became casualties, killed, wounded and missing, representing more than a quarter of the total force committed. Approximately 270 transport aircraft were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Germany's paratroopers had taken the island, but at a cost so severe that Hitler told Kurt Student, the architect of German airborne doctrine, that the day of the paratrooper was finished. The first wave at Malemi Airfield lost more than half its men within the opening hour. Paratroopers landing near Heraklion were cut down before they reached the ground. 3 landing zone commanders were killed or seriously wounded on the first day alone. The paratroopers took the island anyway, but it took 10 days and more than a quarter of the committed force to accomplish what the doctrine said should take hours, and those numbers were what Hitler took away from the battle. Hitler was drawing the wrong lesson. Crete demonstrated a badly designed operation, not a failed concept. The paratroopers were jumping with only a pistol. Their rifles, their machine guns, their heavier weapons were packed in separate containers dropped alongside them, and the men had to find those containers on hostile ground under fire before they could effectively fight back. At Crete, armed Cretan civilians, men, women and elderly villagers attacked paratroopers who had landed separated from their weapon canisters and couldn't arm themselves. German after-action reports specifically noted paratroopers being killed by civilian defenders before locating their weapons. The doctrine, not the concept, was the problem. The Allies understood this. They studied Crete, identified the failures, and built better procedures around the same core idea. By 1944, Allied paratroopers jumped with their weapons secured to their harnesses, the canister problem significantly mitigated and the doctrine corrected. American paratroopers used specialized jump bags that kept their primary weapons attached to their harness through the jump. Jump altitudes were reduced to limit scatter across the drop zone. Pathfinder teams deployed 30 minutes ahead of the main force to mark landing areas with panels and radar beacons. The chaos that had killed hundreds of Germany's paratroopers at Crete, isolated men, separated from their weapons, coming down in the wrong location, was engineered into a manageable problem rather than a fatal one. Germany had provided the case study. The Allies had done the engineering. Between Crete in May 1941 and the German surrender in May 1945, the Fallschirmjäger conducted pre-planned reinforcement drops during the Allied landing in Sicily in 1943. With the exception of one disastrous, localized drop during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, everything else was infantry work. They held the monastery at Monte Cassino against 4 months of Allied assaults, one of the most tenacious defensive performances of the Italian campaign. They were effective soldiers. Any competent infantry division could have done what they were asked to do. No other German formation could have done what they had been built for. Students' commanders had been trained to analyze airspace, plan drop sequences, coordinate with glider formations, and synchronize with armored relief columns timed to the minute. In Italy, they were holding coastal sectors and mountain passes. In Normandy, they were dug into hedgerows. Student submitted his first new airborne proposal to Berlin in late 1941. It was rejected. He submitted a variation in 1942. That was rejected too. Each time, the men who would have executed the operation were holding ground any infantry regiment could hold. The force kept growing anyway. By the end of the war, the Fallschirmjäger had expanded to more than 10 numbered divisions. Late war recruits were receiving less than 8 weeks of training before reaching the front. Men previously rejected by the regular army as physically unfit were wearing paratrooper insignia. The organizational identity of Germany's premier airborne force was maintained, expanded, and thoroughly emptied of the content that had made it meaningful. While this was happening, roughly 20,000 Allied paratroopers opened the Normandy invasion. 35,000 dropped into Holland during Operation Market Garden in September 1944, the largest airborne operation in history, even as its final objective at Arnhem fell short. More than 16,000 crossed the Rhine from the air at Wesel in March 1945. Germany had taught its enemies how to do what Germany had stopped doing and watched them use it to win. Hitler grounded the paratroopers. Himmler kept building the SS past the point where building made any military sense. It wasted its armored elite through the opposite mechanism, by building more of them until the growth consumed what it was supposed to represent. In the autumn of 1943, German Army Group commanders were filing classified quarterly reports on the reliability of every division under their command. The system was called the inneren Kampfwert, a 4-group assessment running from absolutely reliable down to prone to failure. The divisions were never shown their own ratings, specifically to enable unsentimental honesty from the officers filing them. Army Group North was consistently placing its Latvian and Estonian SS formations in the lower groups. The reports documented what the build-out was actually producing, and the build-out continued anyway. Nobody in the system had the authority to use those ratings to stop Himmler from ordering more divisions. The pattern was consistent across Army Group reports from 1943 through 1944. Veteran Army formations, even numerically weakened by months of sustained fighting, held Group 1 and Group 2 inner combat value ratings. Foreign SS formations filing alongside them held Group 3 and Group 4. Germany's own assessment system was recording, in plain categorical terms, that the organizational growth had outrun the capacity to produce what it claimed to represent. The SS divisions that built the genuine reputation had years of continuous combat behind them, from France and the early Eastern Front through the brutal winter of 1941 to 42. That experience created the veteran NCOs and officers who understood combined arms at the unit level. Later divisions could not train their way to that standard because training alone cannot produce what continuous combat produces. The inneren Kampfwert ratings were recording a gap that no timetable could close. Nothing illustrated this more directly than the 13th SS Handschar Division. The division was formed in early 1943 on a specific promise that Bosnian Muslim recruits would fight only against Yugoslav partisans threatening their own communities. Himmler believed regional and religious identity would produce motivated fighters on familiar ground. The division was permitted to maintain Islamic religious observance and was assigned Bosnian imams as chaplains. During training in occupied France in September 1943, pro-partisan infiltrators within the ranks led a mutiny, executing their German officers in an attempt to defect to the Allied side. When the uprising was suppressed, the division was eventually deployed to Yugoslavia, but never functioned as the motivated local force Himmler had promised it would be. An SS division whose mutineers had to be stopped by their own imam. This is what the growth had reached by 1943. Not diluted effectiveness, but active institutional collapse, wearing the same insignia as the formations that had held at Kharkov. By 1944, Germany was effectively maintaining three parallel military organizations competing for the same industrial output, the same manpower, and the same equipment. The Heer, under OKH, the Luftwaffe field divisions under Göring, who built his own ground army for the same institutional reasons Himmler had, and the Waffen-SS. Three power structures drawing simultaneously on the same collapsing resource base. The SS was one arm of a tripartite competition that made Germany's manpower problem structurally unsolvable, regardless of what happened on any specific battlefield. Subscribe if you want history that follows the institutional logic, not just the battles. Because the question this video is building toward isn't about either formation specifically. It's about the system that produced both failures simultaneously. The Fallschirmjäger were grounded by two men whose interests aligned on the same outcome. Hitler concluded after Crete that airborne warfare was finished. Göring had his own reasons to keep them grounded. Elite troops deployed as infantry remained under Luftwaffe organizational control, preserving his resources and prestige. Student spent the remaining years of the war submitting operational plans. A drop to relieve Stalingrad, an insertion behind Allied lines in Italy. Every plan was rejected. The man who built German airborne doctrine from scratch watched it sit unused from a desk while his paratroopers held mountains on foot. Hitler approved every growth request Himmler submitted for the Waffen-SS. No institution could impose a ceiling on what was consuming the manpower those divisions depended on. German army group commanders filing innere Kampfwert assessments that documented the failure were filing them into a system that had no channel for that information to reach the person making the decisions. The Wehrmacht's general staff watched both processes unfold and could do nothing about either. Both operated entirely outside the reach of military logic, because military logic had no authority over either of them. Germany did not waste its greatest elite forces through incompetence in the field. It wasted them through decisions made above the military and enforced downward without any mechanism for correction. The question is whether any of it was reversible. By the summer of 1944, the Waffen-SS had crested at 38 divisions, while Kurt Student watched Allied paratroopers jump into Normandy using doctrine he had built. Both decisions were already irreversible. The argument worth having is whether reversing either one would have mattered at all, whether stopping the SS build-out earlier and redirecting those resources to the Heer could have held the Eastern Front longer, whether keeping Germany's paratroopers in the fight could have changed the shape of a war the Allies were winning in the air, or whether Germany had already passed the point where any institutional correction changes the outcome. Drop your position below. Subscribe if this changes how you look at what Germany's greatest formations were actually for. And thanks for watching.